Modern Love, the podcast, is made possible with support from Living Proof. Living Proof's dry shampoo is so good at actually cleaning hair that you can take a spin class and not wash your hair after. Use the code LOVE at livingproof.com for a free travel-size dry shampoo with your $20 order. We are the science. You are the living proof. And by Squarespace, providing tools that help people showcase their passions with a customized landing page, website, or online store. Also offering domains, hosting, and 24/7 support. Get your free trial at squarespace.com/modernlove. You should. Squarespace.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. Nicole Carr seems like any other young mom, balancing career and family, rushing from activity to activity, and working to keep her marriage strong. But Nicole has another challenge. Every day, she sees her husband and her kids a little less. Here's her Modern Love piece, Together Always in Darkness and in Light, read by Tony Award-winning actress Patina Miller.
There is no good way to tell a new guy in your life that you're going blind. I chose the best of lousy options. I broke the news after sex, and I packaged it right. At 22, David was a novelist just starting his career, and I knew if I framed my plight as poetic, he'd find it irresistible, at least on a narrative level. So lying next to him in the dark, I told the story like a gothic novel. I started with how 3 years earlier at 19, I realized I couldn't see the stars at night. This seemed like an innocent enough detail until it turned out to be the first symptom of an incurable degenerative retinal disease. The doctor told me I would slowly lose my eyesight over the next 10 to 15 years. First my nighttime and peripheral vision, and later my central vision too. I ended on a high note. Losing my vision, I explained, was teaching me to really see. I would go blind with a bang, not a whimper, by seeing and doing more in the next decade than most people did in a lifetime. All true, but only part of the story. The pretty part. Our romance was still new, and I was nervous about how he would react to my disclosure. His response, though, was as grand and poetic as the story itself. The next time we met, he wore my name on his arm. 6 lowercase letters stained the skin indelibly. As I admired the tattoo, he told me I had lit his darkness and he would light mine. No matter what came, he said, we would face it together. He was all in. I met David at our last semester in college, where we were both English and theater majors. I liked that he was smart, but not pretentious, funny, but never mean. I liked his disarming sincerity, so different from my own reliance on charm and subterfuge. There was a solidity to him, and it made me feel safe for the first time since my diagnosis. Where David was heavy, I was light. Where he was restrained, I was freewheeling. I made him laugh and got him to do things that scared him, like moving to Los Angeles. He was a small-town Southern boy who had always dreamed of living in California, but was never ready to take the plunge until I took it with him. In Los Angeles, David helped me with my acting auditions, and I edited his manuscripts. On weekends, we lowered the top on his beat-up convertible and drove up the Pacific Coast Highway, our music loud. The Golden Hills looked like the backs of sleeping lions, we agreed. David drove for hours, one-handed, because the other hand was melded to mine. Our life together was a grand romance, and my encroaching blindness was more blessing than curse because it galvanized us to live with urgency. The blindness was poetic because it hadn't happened yet. In the abstract, blindness is epic, noble, simple. In reality, it's a different story altogether. In reality, it's tedious, draining, messy. It changes you in surprising ways, some positive and some not. It's a lot like the reality of being married. "10 years in, on my 33rd birthday, I found myself sobbing, alone, on a stoop in Brooklyn. I had quit acting because I could no longer navigate the dark stages and sets. We had moved back to Brooklyn, my hometown, because my driving had become untenable. We had gotten married and had a son, a long, lithe baby with bee-stung eyes. I was elated I could discern these details, and just as overjoyed to see the round cheeks and bold lips of my newborn daughter 2 years later. I watched the color of their eyes deepen into blue, and seeing these changes suffused me with gratitude. But I was suffused too, with fear. The year of our daughter's birth marked the 10-year anniversary of my diagnosis, and by then, I had lost enough sight to be deemed legally blind. My eyesight had closed in like the aperture on a camera, leaving me with extreme tunnel vision. I constantly collided into people and things, monkey bars, fire hydrants, cabinet doors left ajar. I developed cataracts that made it difficult for me to fill out forms at the pediatrician's office or, really, read anything at all. I had been so busy making the most of my vision that I hadn't prepared myself for losing it. I never spoke of my disease, not even to the few people who knew about it. Concealing my vision loss was isolating and frightening. I was scared I would walk the stroller into a manhole or lose my children at the playground, scared of a future in which I could no longer see their faces. My confidence had taken a hit too. I gave up wearing heels because I fell in them. Gave up eyeliner because I couldn't put it on straight. Gave up reading because I couldn't make out print. I felt like I wasn't just losing my sight, but essential parts of what made me me. Because I had no other resources in my place for support. The onus fell to David, who became my surreptitious seeing eye guy. All of that, in addition to the typical strains of raising 2 young children, was taxing on a marriage. On my 33rd birthday, David and I splurged on a sitter and planned a dinner out with friends. I spent an hour applying makeup in a magnifying mirror, only to have David observe it was a little, uneven. On the walk to the restaurant, we reopened the debate about whether or not to have a 3rd child. I wanted to, but was terrified I wouldn't be able to take care of the baby with my failing vision. David told me he would follow my lead, but he didn't see how we would possibly make it work. Our resources, money, time, and yes, vision, were already so limited. Halfway to the restaurant, our discussion developed into an argument, which ended with David storming off and telling me to go to the party without him. I stopped in my tracks, crumpled onto the nearest stoop, and I sobbed. I wasn't helpless. I could find my way home. But I couldn't go to the party without him. I couldn't see well enough to find my friends or read the menu. I needed David, and he resented it, and I resented his resentment. I remembered how I had told him I would go blind with a bang and not a whimper, and how he had promised we would always be together in darkness and in light. Seemed like we'd both been wrong. Some minutes later, David's big brown boots, the ones I always tripped over when he left them by the door, stepped into frame. "You can't just leave me," I said. "I need you." "I know," he said. "I hate it." "So do I." Then he took my hand and said we'd figure it out. We're still figuring it out. The thing about slowly losing something that feels indispensable is you're constantly adjusting to the loss. As soon as you find a comfortable balance, something shifts and you have to recalibrate. Not long after my birthday, I called the New York State Commission for the Blind, which taught me how to use a mobility cane and adaptive technology. I got a magnifier, so I didn't need David to measure the children's Tylenol or adjust the thermostat. I reclaimed my abilities I had lost and started to make peace with what I had to let go. A year later, David took me to dinner and said he had something to tell me. His face was hazy in the candlelight, but I could see his mouth breaking into a smile. "I think we should have another baby," he said. I blinked. "But what about..." David took my hand and cut me off. "We'll figure it out." He spoke with the same certainty that made him tattoo my name on his arm so long ago. His faith bred faith in me. We would have another child, and it would be hard and spectacular, and we would be in it together. Together in moments glorious and tedious. Whatever else it was, poetic, prosaic, and everything in between, our story would be ours to share.
Patina Miller, reading Nicole Carr's modern love piece, Together Always, in Darkness and in Light. So Nicole and David said they were going to have that third child and kind of figure it out as they went along. Did they? We'll check in with Nicole Carr to see how she's doing today. There's more after the break.
I'm Katie at Living Proof, and we get love letters all the time, like this one. Dear Living Proof, I used to think my hair was too fine to hold a style, but now everyone tells me how thick and beautiful it looks. All my life, I struggled with and hated my hair. Now I love it, and I'm proud of it thanks to you. At this point, you'd have to pry your Prime Style Extender from my cold, dead hands. Love, Samantha. You can use the code LOVE for a free travel-sized dry shampoo with your $20 order. livingproof.com.
Well, we're back. This is Modern Love, the podcast. And with me now is Daniel Jones, editor of Modern Love for the New York Times. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Meghna. Good to be back.
Great to have you. Also with us is the author of the piece you just heard, Nicole Carr. Nicole, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
So, Nicole, you wrote this piece about a year ago. I guess I should just first ask, has your eyesight continued to decline?
Yeah, it continues to decline. Primarily, I have this tunnel vision. It's sort of like looking at everything through a spotlight. Mm-hmm. And I'm night blind, and I've got cataracts. So I feel like an 80-year-old woman. I've got these ridiculously inconvenient cataracts. So, yeah, it keeps on declining.
Dan, this is such a powerful story about dealing with all sorts of adversities, actually, that can come in relationships. But what I loved about what Nicole does is she doesn't romanticize how you deal with them.
Well, I mean, what fascinated me about Nicole's story and what I thought she did such a good job of is she comes clean about wanting to romanticize how this will go. And she makes a parallel to how we anticipate how marriage is going to go. And then there's the reality.
Yeah.
You know, what really happens in marriages. And I feel like we get into so much trouble in long-term relationships because we forecast a fantasy.
But, Nicole, I have to say that near the top of the story where you tell us about how David gets your name inked onto him, that the romantic part of me, Nicole, is really glad that, he's still in the picture.
Me too. Let me tell you. It's funny because when I have 3 kids and they love fairy tales.
So you did have your third child. Yeah.
I did have the third child. Yeah. So I have a daughter who's 3 and a daughter who's 8 and a son who's just turned 11. And we tell a lot of fairy tales. And at the end of the fairy tale, I always say they lived more or less happily ever after. So my kids know to supply that ending because I do think, you want the fantasy and you need it, but I feel like it needs to be tempered just a little bit.
Right.
When we think about the best aspects, or which dovetail into sometimes the worst aspects of relationships, is that we all end up needing the other person in fundamental ways that we didn't anticipate. But in your case, you could anticipate what those needs were going to be.
Yeah, need is a really interesting part of love and marriage and parenting. Once I was talking to a group of college students. I had done a reading and I was talking to them, and this person in the audience asked me if I ever felt like a burden to David. That's a doozy of a question. Do I ever feel like a burden to my husband? But I thought about it for a second and I said, yes, but he's a burden to me too. Trust me. So are these 3 kids. They're a huge burden. That's, we're all a burden to each other. So it is hard to admit that. It's hard to swallow, but I try to remind myself of the ways in which he needs me in, little prosaic ways too.
And you said you have a 3-year-old now?
Yeah, I have a 3-year-old.
And how's parenting a toddler with your vision?
It's tough, I'll tell you. This is my 3rd toddler.
Oh, that's right, of course.
Yeah.
But this, it's all brand new because I keep losing more vision all the time. So it was really a walk in the park with the first one. But, we make modifications, we make accommodations, and she knows all about my eyes. So if we're in a dark place, she'll say, "Mommy, you don't have good eyes. Hold my hand, Mommy."
Will you eventually lose your sight completely?
It's certainly very possible. I've sort of resigned myself to that eventuality. If it doesn't happen, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But yeah, I envision a future in which I don't see. And I figure I'll just cope with it when it happens. And maybe it won't. And, when the going gets tough, I have to say the kids, it sounds super cheeseball-y, but, they are a great source of sort of hope and light for me. So
cheeseball-y because it's true, though. I hear you. Well, Nicole Carr is the author of this week's story, Together Always, in Darkness and in Light. And Nicole's memoir, Now I See You, explores her last decade with sight. Nicole, thank you so much again for speaking with us.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
And Dan Jones, editor of Modern Love and the author of Love Illuminated, exploring life's most mystifying subject with the help of 50,000 strangers. Dan, thanks again.
Thank you, Meghna.
Special thanks to Patina Miller, who read this week's essay. She's known for her Tony Award-winning work on Broadway, as well as her film roles in The Hunger Games, Part 1 and Part 2. She can now be seen in the CBS series Madam Secretary. Next week on Modern Love, Amber Tamblyn reads a story about a dramatic leap of faith.
A tarot card reader once told me that my mother had done something she felt inexplicably compelled to do. She hadn't meant to harm me. I just happened to be there, along for the ride.
Here's what we're hearing about your leaps of faith.
This is Jules Blackwell from Manhattan. I discovered a man on LinkedIn. I decided to be bold and try to meet him by delivering a present to his work. Because his company has 2 offices in Manhattan, I went to the wrong one first, to ultimately meet him and give him, quote, the best surprise of his life.
And we want to hear more stories, so tell us, just keep it to 3 sentences or less, and write it down or record a voice memo and email it to modernlove@wbur.org. And don't forget to tell us where you're from so we can add you to our worldwide Modern Love map that's on our website. Again, that's modernlove@wbur.org. Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, John Perotti, and Amory Sievertson. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. And special music this week from Dave Stovall and Henry Gale. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. Thanks for listening.